My talk title is Staying Centered in Gratitude. And a lot of times images come to me and remind me, Amy, you can put up a little card. Tell us about your dream. I had this really amazing dream last night that I want to share with you in a moment. But I want to start with what was coming up during the meditation and during our beautiful songs. And that was the image of a figure skater. And a figure skater, when they are spinning, now I don't know the technical terms, but when they're spinning and their arms are out, when they start to move toward the center, what happens? They start to speed up, right? They start to accelerate something, and movement starts to happen in a new and powerful way. And that's really the image that came up as I am imagining what it means to stay centered. The other thing that's emerging for me in this moment is a recognition that we don't grow spiritually. We grow in awareness of our spiritual essence. And that right there is a total shift in consciousness, awareness, and the way we be in the world. Who we be in the world. I know that's not grammatically correct, but it's something that is so clear to me that it's not about growth. Now, if you're anything like me, your early spiritual journey, and maybe your journey today, is an idea that we're supposed to grow spiritually. I need to become something. I need to become enlightened. I need to become awake. I need to be more grateful, right? This is a time, I think, moving into Thanksgiving week is very interesting because it could be that we get a message that I should be grateful. And so we're going to talk about what gratitude actually is from my perspective, and this shift in awareness that we're not actually here to grow or become something, but to be aware of that which already exists within us. This is so different than many of the models, if you will, on how we awaken, because the question that I have is, what if this is the most awakened you'll ever be? Then what? And if it's true that the only thing that actually exists, reality is only this very moment, then the truth of that is also that this is indeed the most awakened or enlightened I will ever be. What am I going to do with that information? Now, if you're hearing this through the ego mind, you might hear oh my gosh, really? This is it? This is as awake as I'm ever going to be? When we tap into spirit and recognize, as Amy so beautifully spoke to in the prayer, when we tap into, or we are centered in beingness, in our true nature, there is infinite possibility that exists. It's endless, right? We move beyond the dimension of time and space reality. We move beyond the construct of personality, thought structures, and we tap into something that is actually reality. And that happens one moment at a time. And it can happen in this moment when we make the decision to become aware of that. And we talk about this a lot. Consciousness really is, where am I putting my focus? Where am I putting my attention? Am I putting my attention on my personality self, my thoughts, my beliefs, my ideas? And if you are a human being on planet Earth, well, I'll put it this way. Every human being I've ever met, our mind is filled with opinions. It's filled with ideas. It's filled with the ideas of good, bad, right, wrong, what we want, what we don't want. And having that mind be a trusted servant rather than the master of our life is the fundamental shift. So how does this tie into the topic of staying centered in gratitude? I want to offer the possibility that what some of us have been believing gratitude is might not be the whole story. Because a lot of times we hear gratitude talked about as a feeling. I feel grateful. And of course it is. That is part of the experience of gratitude. What if gratitude was a way of being? What if gratitude was a frequency? And if gratitude is a frequency, then we have a choice to either tune into that or to tune out of that. And if I look at it without judgment and say, wow, what does it create when I tune into that? What happens in my life and what happens in the way I interact with the world? Or what happens when I believe that I am my personality, my collection of ideas or beliefs? So I'm going to share my dream, and I'm going to tell you that I'm not going to name the person in the dream, but you're all highly intelligent people, so I know you're going to figure out who it is. I had a dream last night about a political figure that's been in our consciousness for the last, 8 years, 6 years, 7 years. And this person is seemingly polarizing, divisive. Some would say he's a horrible person. Some would say he's the savior. But here's the dream, and it was kind of surprising to me. So in this dream, this person says to me, he's holding a golden trumpet, and he hands me the trumpet and puts it down on the floor. And he says, this golden trumpet is the message that I've come here to bring to the world. And he shifted the trumpet and he said, and look how destructive it seems. Look how divisive it seems. Look how it seems to be causing so much friction in our world. And he said, that's who I've come here to be. I've come here to speak. The trumpet is playing, right? It's the sound. I've come here to sound, or to put voice to all that seeming division and separation and us and them and good and bad. What's really happening, and keep in mind, this is the dream, and this person's telling me this in the dream. What's really happening is we're about to shift the focus of the trumpet into oneness. Now, I learned many years ago how to interpret dreams. And I learned from a book that said, if you had a dream about this, then that means that. And I thought, well, that's very interesting, because I think it really is more about what does this dream mean to me, not what does someone who wrote a book maybe 100 years ago, what does it mean if you're in a boat? What does it mean if you see a trumpet or a polarizing political figure? And so someone taught me early on how to look at a dream as an invitation to look what's happening within my own consciousness, and an invitation to recognize that we are every character in the dream. In other words, I'm this political figure, I'm this trumpet, I am the person who is observing it. And so in the dream, we look at these different symbols as a representation of something happening in consciousness. So this political figure, in my interpretation, it represents the part of me that is filled with judgment. That's filled with divisiveness, that's filled with, I've got you, like maybe a polarizing, like a very opinionated person. Now, that lives within me. The trumpet represents the message, and the person in this dream that was delivering the message was delivering the message of the ego, the division, the good, bad, right, wrong. And what happens in the dream, see, it's not that there's this person that's other than me. It's that I am that person, and that person represents that part of me that might sometimes be tempted to report from the paradigm of fear, report from the paradigm of otherness, sound that trumpet of division. And then in the dream, the person says, what I have really come here to do, who I have really come here to be, is to shift that into the message of oneness. Once I understood that I could interpret a dream in recognizing that all of these characters in the dream were really an aspect of myself, I began to practice this. For many years, I practiced this. And when I would have a dream, I would recognize that there's a part of me in this dream, and that these characters are actually a part of me. And I woke up one day and I realized, oh my gosh, the dream and the conscious state are actually not separate. If it's true, those of us who are students of New Thought, there is only one power and one presence active in the world and active in my life, then I must also recognize that regardless of the figure, even a seemingly polarizing figure, if I'm going to actually live that principle, that person's not separate from me. I do believe, it's just an idea, that science will look back on this time and they'll say they were starting to understand something, that we're all organisms, we're all part of one organism, cells in an organism, that we're not actually separate, and that really what we're here to do is to shift our awareness into this oneness and to recognize there is no other. And so that dream to me ties into gratitude really clearly, because Where am I, the trumpet represents the message, right? Reporting, as Michael Beckwith says, reporting from the new paradigm, reporting from the old paradigm. And the old paradigm, as we've already established, is a paradigm of fear, separation, anxiety, not enoughness, division. And the new paradigm, although it's always existed, the new paradigm is that of oneness, of connection, of gratitude as a frequency, as a way of being. So imagine the figure skater again, and imagine everything happening in the world. And does it ever feel like you're spinning in the middle of this world? Or maybe the world is spinning around you and you've got all the different media happening and the social media and the family members and your friends and the thoughts in your head. And maybe they're spinning around you and it feels like you're off center. And as you pull into the center, something really powerful happens. We start to spin at a frequency and vibrate at a frequency that then becomes infinite. I've always amazed when I watch a figure skater how fast they can spin at that moment. And then the arms go out. And that arm going out can represent that we are now reporting in a very different way. We're reporting from our true nature, our essential beingness. The message is not that I need to be grateful for or that I should be grateful, but that gratitude is a frequency that already exists within me. It's a greater reality and it's a choice. There's something happening in our culture that's so interesting. As we evolve, we come up with new terminology. And I know some of you have heard this, but now there's a phrase called toxic positivity. And the idea is that if we're too positive, that can actually be toxic. Now, I'm going to break down what I think people are saying by this. I think they're talking about spiritual bypass, which is I'm going to pretend like nothing bad is happening in my life or in the world. And I'm just going to go positive and I'm not going to talk about anything that seems negative. And I can understand how that would be toxic. But of course, as these things go, once these things are in our consciousness, we start to frame them in a really interesting way. I mean, I've actually heard people say, well, it's toxic to be too positive. Now, that's, I don't think, really what we're here to talk about today. But I do want to lean into that because sometimes it can be tempting to think that gratitude means I always need to feel good or it always needs to feel positive. And sometimes situations happen in our life and in the world, and they can be difficult or painful. And at one level of consciousness, we might say, oh, isn't this terrible? This is happening. Oh my gosh, one more time. And then we start to restrict and go into an old story or an old belief. And we start to own that as like, oh, this is horrible that it's happening. Then as we start to wake up, we start to say, whoa, what if I call it good? This is great. This is happening for my own evolution. Something greater is happening than my mind can comprehend. I can look back on my life and I can look at some of the things that felt the most painful that ended up being the most transformational. As a matter of fact, I spoke at Emergence and I told more of my own personal story than I normally do. And I experienced a little bit of shame afterward. Oh, I shouldn't have told that. One thing that emerged at Emergence is that I realized as I was telling that story that if those events that were extremely painful in my early life didn't happen, I would not be doing the work I do, period. And so even though it was really painful, it became the fertilizer for purpose, right? We hear shift happens. We know the original term. And I say this one a lot, but with just a small shift in awareness, we can say fertilizer happens. And then we might be in a level of consciousness where we say, oh, we're just going to shift to gratitude. I'm going to look at what I can be grateful for. What I'm inviting in this moment is to look at a greater possibility, maybe a new possibility. For some of us, it might not be new at all, but for some of us, this might be a new idea. What if I didn't need to accept or reject or cling or avert? What if I looked at it all without judgment and asked myself, I wonder what's wanting to emerge right now? I wonder what the greatest benefit for my soul. I'm going to quote Michael Beckwith again. He says, a good day for the ego is a bad day for the soul. A bad day for the ego is a good day for the soul. Now, good, bad, right, wrong, maybe not the way I would say it right now, but what he means by this is sometimes things that seem difficult, that our ego mind might call bad, end up being the fertilizer for a new way of being and seeing. And it's possible, I don't know. The mind tries to figure things out. So we have entire spiritual organizations, if you will, movements, religions that are trying to figure out the meaning of life. And once they figure it out, they tell you what it is, and then you join them, right? Like the whole idea of heaven and hell and the afterlife. And a lot of times people try to figure out what's going to happen when we die. I think a more powerful question is, what's going to happen this day that we're alive? I'm thinking of Winnie the Pooh, and I think it's Winnie the Pooh is, I'm not always great at getting the details exact, but someone says to Winnie the Pooh, one day we're going to die. And he said, yes, but every other day we're going to live. And so rather than trying to figure out what's going to happen down the road, we can say, how am I here to live today? So how does this tie into this idea of gratitude, of a good day for the soul? It's possible, or it's been said, and I don't know if it's true, but it's possible that we've chosen to be here on planet Earth at this time so that we can transform the consciousness that has preceded us. And if you look back at human history, it's filled with all sorts of love and connection and openness, and it's also filled with fear and disease and otherness and violence. And so it is possible that some of us, a group of us, have chosen to be here right now to play that trumpet of oneness, to say, yes, in the midst of all of that, we can be the frequency of gratitude. I can unplug from reporting from the old paradigm. I can unplug from the messages of seeming division. I can honor, and this is important to me, I can honor my emotional experience. This isn't about using gratitude to not feel. This is about using gratitude in the midst of anything showing up and then becoming curious. If there's the most powerful, to me, the most powerful spiritual practice is curiosity. I wonder what this is. I wonder what's wanting to emerge. I wonder what my soul's, the transformation of my soul, I wonder what is happening right now for my own transformation. I had a situation a few days ago, and it threw me a little off center for a moment. I threw my arms out. I found myself disoriented. And then I started asking these questions through curiosity. Wow, I wonder what's wanting to emerge. I wonder how this can be useful for my own transformation. Because my own transformation then naturally leads to being of service in the world. That's the real shift. Again, I'm going to use the analogy, we're off center, spinning, things are happening slowly. We start to pull in to that center of gratitude, staying centered in that. We start to spin, we start to vibrate at a new possibility, a new frequency, and then it's ours to bring out into the world. And once I arrive there, I can arrive at a place where I'm no longer rejecting any parts of me, including the part of me that has judgment, or the part of me that feels jealous, or the part of me that feels love for someone, or the part of me that feels connection, the part of me that feels sad. Embracing it all and recognizing that it is all spiritual takes us into a new realm of existence, a new way of being in the world that is not about the outer as much as it's about the inner. And when I unplug from what's happening in the world and tune into the frequency of gratitude or infinite beingness, words are always limited in some way, but we have these wonderful words that point to this experience. And then I begin to be that in the world. And then, as I usually say, life becomes a great experiment. What gets created when I tune into that, what gets created when I tune into that. I think it's Nietzsche that said, within every judgment is the seed of revenge. I noticed that this week. I noticed a judgment I had. And then I noticed my ego mind plotting It happened quickly. This is the good news, or I'll say this is the useful news. Let's put it that way. The useful part of it is I can catch myself now, and I often look at it with humor. It's like, oh, I had a judgment of someone and what they did. Oh, wow, look at that judgment. And then I noticed that my mind started like coming up with different scenarios, how to make this right. And then I get to breathe, take a deep breath, have love and compassion for that part of me. Bring that part of me in and spiritualize it, not reject it. Oh, wonderful judger part of me, I welcome you to this table of love, of gratitude. We then start to shift from being grateful for to being grateful in to being grateful as. And that's what our workshop is about today. Some of you have probably heard me talk about the 3 levels of gratitude. And we tend to look at what we're grateful for. And we're going to explore, and we're exploring in this moment, how we shift from being grateful for to being grateful in the midst of anything. And again, not in a way of pretending that something's not difficult or painful. Being in the possibility that in the midst of this, there is something that's wanting to emerge that will help my soul's evolution, and therefore the cosmos is yearning for expansion and openness. And ultimately, being the frequency, being gratitude itself, being that vibration, tuning into that, not seeking it. Language is so interesting. I remember when I started my spiritual community in 2012, which was Awakened Living before it became Agape Bay Area, we used the terminology spiritual seekers. And then I realized that's so interesting because that's not who we've really come here to be. We're not seeking spirituality. We're recognizing, recognizing, becoming aware of a greater reality, and then being that in the world. Sometimes it's so simple. And Amy, you and I talk about this. You know, we speak a lot, we speak often. We speak a lot and often. We speak often, and it's interesting because in some ways the message is always the same. And then we have these topics that help us talk about this very, very simple concept from a different lens. And the simple concept is you are a whole and perfect spiritual being. You came into this world as a perfect expression, a perfect emanation, a particle of God essence, of spirit, of love, of gratitude. And the journey is simply that of returning to that, excavating all the layers of what we've put on top of it so that we can have a great remembering of who and what we are. And then we be that in the world and watch everything that we called reality begin to dissolve. It's pixelated. It's not solid. Science shows us and tells us that the chair, if you're sitting in a chair right now, it's actually not solid. Now be with that for a moment. Total faith that that chair is going to hold you up, and yet it's not solid. It shows up as solid. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know how it shows up as solid. Something about something whirling and holding it densely. But what I mean by that is what we can see feels so real to us that we begin to trust it. I trust that I'm going to sit down in a chair. I trust that gravity, even though I have no concept of how we're whirling around the sun, but I trust it. I don't understand electricity, but we don't turn on light switches anymore. We say, I'm not going to say it because my lights will start blinking, but we call out a name and then she turns on the lights for us now, or it's programmed to happen at a certain time. See, we begin to trust these things that we call reality. And yet they're not really what they seem. And so once we start to question or ask ourselves, what if what I consider to be reality isn't as solid as I once believed? In other words, I don't have to say it's a lie or it's untrue. What if it's just not as solid as I once believed, including my points of view, including my age, my race, my sexual orientation, my gender, all of it, my country of origin, the country I live in, the state I live in? Look how there's so much meaning attached to that now. And what if it's not as solid as we believe, but we've come to believe that it's solid and we've come to depend on it like we depend on sitting on a chair to hold us up? Wow. Be with that for a moment. I've come to depend on my ego identity, what it means. Let's say what it means to be someone who lives in Texas. What does it mean to be someone who lives in California? Now, we've been programmed to believe those mean certain things, and there might be some truth to it, but it's not as solid as we've once believed. And yet we come to rely on that as the truth. And so what I'm inviting in closing, and of course, hopefully we have some time for some Q&A, but what I want to say in closing is, as we tune into the frequency of gratitude and understand at a very deep level, not only a mind-based reality, not a learned concept, it can be an emotional experience, but we're inviting you to tap in much deeper and hold that in as you start to spin as the frequency of gratitude, and then become curious about what you once called reality, and become curious what effect it has on you, your family, your friends, the world, as you understand what is true with a capital T, not relative reality that's always changing, but the truth of our spiritual essence that we could call gratitude.